This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 130. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 130. And in this episode, we're going to be talking through the labor and skill gap that our industry is facing. This is going to be a two-part episode series. First episode, we're going to define the problem. We're going to talk about how folks are currently solving it right now. And we're going to take a look at some other industries and how they're solving the problem. And who knows, maybe you'll come out of this episode on the same page as us saying, you know, there's a better way to do this. Or maybe you'll still think that the old way works. We'll see. I really look forward to your comments in the discussion section on the podcast page to see kind of what your thoughts are. So titled this episode, Why Doing Your Time is Dumb. And don't worry, we're going to get to what the second episode in the series is at the end of this episode. You're really going to want to find out what that is because I think you're going to find tremendous value from that. But like I said, we titled this episode, Why Doing Your Time is Dumb and What to Do Instead. Now, if you can't tell where my personal position is on this topic, it is, let me make it crystal clear to you. I think all of you listening to this have been undersold on your capabilities. I think you are capable of so much more than folks are telling you you're capable of. I know from experience, both from myself as well as from our 3,000 plus students, that you can, in a period of 12 months, have dramatic differences in your capabilities to execute BAS work. Just a little side note, I'm sure you've heard the story before. If you had, just feel free to skip forward 60 seconds. But I started off 2007. I passed my BAS job interview via Wikipedia, memorizing HVAC and BAS terms. Got asked to go program a central plant within the first 4 weeks. Had no clue what I was doing. Short cycling chillers with isolation valves closed. Just doing bad stuff. Now, that is not what I think you should do. Looking back at what I've learned, there's a very clear progression when followed will result in tremendous growth. However, I did not follow that progression. It took me 5 years of self-study, going and reading the Honeywell Gray Manual, and suffice to say, through just grit and determination, ended up leading the technical integration program at a Fortune 100 company within, I think it was 5 years. Within about 5-6 years of being in the field. Went from a service tech to leading a $60 million P&L, to selling analytics, to going and building backnet stacks for Cree and Molex and building all sorts of integrations and being the quote-unquote backnet integration expert. So it can be done, and it can be done doing a very specific set of tasks. But we are not doing that in the industry. If you look around, we have a labor and skill set gap. People are complaining that folks entering the field don't know what they're doing. They're not motivated. We're not going to get into the whole millennial versus baby boomer discussion and entitlement and all that crap. That's just a load of crap to take people in an age group and go and say there's something because of an age group. That's a bunch of complete nonsense. Anyways, what we are going to go into is we're going to look at the old way of developing folks, and we're going to look at the new way, as I believe it should be done, as we're seeing across multiple industries. And that's something that's worked really well for us here at Building Automation Monthly, is looking at what other industries are doing. This is something I personally recommend to you. Whether you're in technician, whether you're in sales, whether you're an owner, look around at parallel industries and see what they do well. See what results and see what makes results, rather. And then copy that. We looked at a bunch of other industries, mainly the IT industry, and how they were starting to deal with their skill set gap. And that is what really helped us form our online training processes and programs. So the labor and skill set gap is going to be really solved in two different ways. And it's either going to be getting more folks in the field at a lower opportunity cost, or it's going to be automation. It's one of the two. So getting folks in at a lower opportunity cost, when you take someone out of the field, or it takes 3 or 4 years, plus it takes all that time of that senior tech who that junior tech is shadowing, that is a huge opportunity cost. That is a huge loss of potential backlog that you could revenue. This is a huge drain on profit and margin percentages. And folks don't like to talk about this, but that's the reality. So if that opportunity cost gets high enough, companies are going to go the automation route. They're going to look at the cost of what it takes to onboard and develop a traditional tech as well as to keep them employed. And then they're going to look at the cost of R&D and development of automation. And you're going to see things like smart equipment. You're going to see things like self-diagnostics and self-programming controls. You're going to see all of that start to hit the market unless we can get the cost of bringing someone new into the field down. So that's our goal. Keep the cost in both time, revenue, and profitability of getting a new tech or new operator or new salesperson into the field as basically as low as possible. All right, so how do we do that? Well, currently that's done through 3 methods, and this is kind of the old way of doing it. And that is mentoring. That's where you're a junior tech, you get brought under a senior tech, you do job ride-alongs, you fetch tools, and this is 50-50. Sometimes you get a good person you're under, sometimes you're just stuck in a closet terminating wires and attaching wire nuts. Then you have trade schools. These are 2 to 3 year programs that will teach you the trade. Once again, it's hit or miss. There's some really good ones out there. There's some ones where I swear the instructor probably couldn't spell BAS if their life depended on it. And then there's university programs. These are starting to increase in number. You're starting to see an increase in 4-year programs. Quite frankly, 4 years to be able to do BAS is a little ridiculous. I'm sorry, this isn't rocket science. This isn't even electrical engineering science. This is building automation. I mean, as you'll see a little bit later in this episode, there's only so many things you need to know to do. And that always really that always bothers me. We'll just leave it at that. It really bothers me when I hear these folks talk about, no, there's no way in 6 months you could come out and be a BAS. Why not? Why couldn't you be a BAS technician? And when we talk through the tasks that you need to do, why? Why do you need to have 5-6 years experience to do them? I mean, really, why? Oftentimes what I see is that it's not the technician and the 6-month or 12-month gap that's causing the issue. It's the lack of the organization to actually have an organized process of executing building automation work. What I mean by that is rather than running it like a conveyor belt where you have a tech who does point-to-point checkout, maybe controller uploads, trunk wiring, etc., and then you have a designer, and then you have a programmer, and yada, yada, yada. No, you have the super tech, God walking on water technician who can do everything, who's got 55 years experience with Niagara 4 that actually came out a couple years ago. And, it's just ridiculous. And oftentimes that is the core of the issue and not actually the experience of the person executing the work. All right, so here's the deal. Those old school processes and programs, they do work. I'm not going to tell you they don't work because that would be simply patternly false. They do work. The problem is they don't work fast. I mean, they work slow and they're hit or miss. And we're seeing this kind of old school thinking across multiple industries. We're seeing it dissolve. And just think, right? So you've got a 4-year programming degree, go get your computer science degree. Then you've got these 3-month boot camps of coding. And I'll be honest with you, when I looked at 3-month boot camps, because at one point in my life, I thought, man, I'm going to become a programmer. That sounds fun. So I looked into that stuff. And I will tell you that I'm someone who has a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, a bunch of certifications, so I'm not opposed to education. Just after going through education, I realized that there are more efficient methods than the current models that we're using. And so, I've heard it all, right? Phil, this can't work. There's so much experience. You need to go in and you need to connect 2 wires up, and you need to be able to make sure your ohm readings match up. I mean, that's very hard to do. And yes, I'm being a little bit sarcastic there, but that is the crux of the problem. Why do we need a 2 to 4 year program or years of apprenticeship? I mean, why? Seriously, sit down right now. And some of you may be upset right now. Some of you may have honestly tuned out. But for the rest of you you're a little upset right now, I've insulted your degree that you went and got. I've told you didn't need to do that, which that's not actually what I was saying if you were hearing it. I was just saying that there's a faster way nowadays. Maybe back when you went through that program, the other methods didn't exist. But nowadays there are faster ways. So what I want you to do, and I often challenge myself to do this because I'm very headstrong. I've never been accused of not having an ego. And so rather than this being the world according to Phil, I want you to sit down and think about, for a honest to God first year technician, what tasks are you really going to have that person do? Not what tasks if that person could cure the blind and turn water into wine and walk on water, but I mean, realistically, what tasks? I'm willing to bet they're going to fall into something like this. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Task 1, installing controllers. So going and putting some DIN rail up, mounting a controller, terminating the power, maybe going and you're looking at configuring the jumpers inside the controller, making sure you're selecting the proper output types, those kind of things. Maybe task 2, connecting and testing I/O, inputs and outputs. So you're looking at wiring diagrams, you're connecting maybe some 4 to 20 milliamp inputs, some resistive inputs, maybe you're configuring some externally or internally sourced relays, those kind of things. And then task 3, uploading and downloading programs. So you're sitting there and you're taking programs that you have and you're uploading them, or you're downloading existing programs, that way they can be modified. And task 4, mapping points, creating graphics, building your point tree, building point extensions. I mean, does any of this sound familiar? Do you agree with me that these would be reasonable tasks to expect a building automation professional to do within their first year? If you agree with me, then let's look at some potential alternatives that can help someone get to the point where they can execute these tasks. But they can do it in 3 months. They can do it in 6 months, maybe a year. Now, I will be honest with you. What I'm about to describe to you, it takes a certain kind of person. If you're the person who you work your 8 hours, but if you're honest, you're really working maybe 5 or 6 because you're on Facebook and you take a long lunch and you go home and you work on your car, or in my case, you work on your airsoft gun. If you're doing that kind of stuff, then for the beginning of your career, now don't get me wrong, when you're 5, 6 years in, you can go home and relax. But when you are early in your career, it's balls to the wall. It is, you get up early, you go through the job documents, you understand where your time can be charged, you understand exactly what needs to be executed, where you are in the project. And if you don't know, you go and you find those you go and ask those questions and find those answers. And then you go home and you research. I'm reminded of one of our students at Automated Logic. And he works the parts desk, if I remember correctly. He actually sent us an email. So as part of our process for corporate customers, we do an assessment. And this assessment it's a skills assessment, and then we do a test. And after this test, we basically say, okay, these people scored these percentages. We recommend they take these courses. Well, he was part of a group of 8. And he finished his test, I think in the first day. They have a week to finish it. He was sending us emails saying, hey, I don't see my courses. When can I log in? And then after we finally got him to log in, he was going and was finishing the course faster than anyone else. We've got another student who's doing the same thing. He's already into his second course, and his fellow students in his cohort are at about 3 to 9% completion with their first course. So there's a certain level of personal drive and personal grit and desire to develop and play for the long game that you have to have in order for these alternative methods to work. If you don't have that, then I'm going to tell you quite honestly, this stuff ain't going to work for you. You might as well end the episode and be like, Phil, I'm not willing to put in a couple hours every night to study and develop. I mean, be honest with yourself. I, for the longest time, was trying to lose weight, and I wouldn't be honest with myself that I didn't want it bad enough. Just, you need to be honest with yourself. For those of you who are still here, I mean, we've probably culled the herd of about 70% of you at this point. But for those of you who are still here, who are committed, let's dive into the alternatives, and then we're going to tell you what's going to be coming up in the next episode, which you're really going to want to hear about. So what are the alternatives to going and attending a school or going and doing an apprenticeship or something like that? Well, you really have 3 alternatives, and those are self-training, online training, and rapid-fire skill-based boot camps, okay? All right, so number 1, self-training. Well, self-training is exactly what it sounds like. You identify skills, and then you close those skill set gaps through self-training. Now, I'll tell you how I did this to advance my career rapidly and how I've seen others do this. Essentially, what you do is you figure out what you want to be. Do you want to be a programmer? Do you want to be a designer? Do you want to be in sales? Whatever it is you want to do. Then you go find job descriptions. And we talked through this in a previous episode, but you find job descriptions, and then once you find those job descriptions, you do an honest assessment of what skills you have and what skills the job requires that you don't have. And then you go and you develop those skills. You do self-study, you buy controllers off eBay, you buy parts, and you just teach yourself how to do it. Now, the pros are it's completely flexible. You can learn anything. I know there's a lot of folks out there who they struggle to believe this statement, but I'm a firm believer that you can learn anything. My wife and I go back and forth all the time because she's a big proponent of education. I'm a big proponent of self-education. And she'll be like, well, you wouldn't want someone who taught themselves off a website performing surgery. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe. I mean, it just depends. Okay, yeah, I mean, I get that that's a little ridiculous. But here's the thing. We're not going typically from installing a resistive sensor and just checking it with an ohm meter to programming a decoupled loop with a primary secondary plant and making sure all that's programmed. And then, oh, by the way, we're writing some JavaScript to pull in an API for a weather station to drive that central plant. And, ooh, we're configuring analytics too. I mean, we're not typically making that leap. There's usually steps between that, hey, I'm going to install some sensors, to I'm going to do complex central plant programming. As I said, I did not know that starting off back early in my career, and I went straight for the grand prize, and that had a lot of painful consequences. But done properly, done realistically, you can go and rapidly learn skills, and it's free-ish. I say free-ish because sometimes you have to buy parts and pieces. It's still amazing to me how many folks are reluctant to spend money on their personal development, but then, and you know, I'll tell you what's really cool is on Facebook or LinkedIn, you look at someone and you know that this person's asking, hey, can I go and I want to develop this skill? And then you go and say, well, why don't you go take this class? And sometimes I'm telling you, I'm not even telling them to take my class. I'm telling them to go take something else. Like oftentimes when folks want to get into BAS one of the things I'll recommend is going and getting a Niagara certification. And I'll say that because that's on at least 50% of the job requirements. That is a big bonus for an employer. So I'll say, hey, go invest and spend $2,800 and get a Niagara certification. Oh, Phil, I don't have $2,800. I can't spend the money. And then you go and you look at them and they're linking to a new SUV they got or a new ATV they got, or they just went on a camping trip and a hunting trip and da-da-da-da-da. And you're like, well, that's interesting. You're complaining about you can't get a high salary, but the investment required to get you to a higher salary you won't make, but you'll invest in things that won't increase your salary. Now, like I said, don't get me wrong, doing hobbies and enjoying life is a good thing, but if you're not willing to invest in growing your skills so that you can actually go and do a higher skilled job and you can make that investment, then, I mean, quite honestly, you have no room to complain. So like I said, it's free-ish. Now, the cons are it requires a lot of discipline. As I started this off, that is something you've got to be honest with yourself. If you're sitting here right now and you're listening to me and you're saying, I want to become a programmer, I want to become a technician, I'm a mechanic, I want to move into being a tech. But, Phil, I'd have to take a pay cut. I'll be honest with you, in some cases, maybe you do. There's a lot of cases where you don't need to take a pay cut if you have the discipline. If you went to maybe like Control Co. and you bought an EasyIO, I think they're FW series that sell for $200. That's a EasyIO controller. It's got wireless, it's got IP, it's got MSTP, it's got a BAS server, a lot of stuff in it for $200 if I remember correctly. And you buy that, and you buy a bunch of sensors, and you teach yourself controls. You write programs until you can't see straight anymore. And then you go into that job interview and you say, I can do all of this with my eyes closed. You're very likely to at least get the same amount of pay you're making right now. And finally, there's just the reality of the blind leading the blind. If you don't know what you're doing and you're not good at researching, self-study is going to be very hard for you. I'll just be honest with you about that. Now, online training. So this is what we do. This is what we've put over 3,000 plus students through. This is where we've had a tremendous amount of success in seeing our students grow. And I challenge anyone who thinks online training doesn't work to find someone who's gone through our training. Come to our Facebook page and just ask someone their opinion. Private message them so that no one even sees it, and ask them to honestly tell you what their experience has been with our stuff. And you will hear some amazing stories of folks getting hired and folks getting raises and folks being able to solve IT problems in a matter of hours, folks being told by their boss that they are the go-to IT person in their building, in their business. I mean, it's pretty awesome stuff. Gives you goosebumps when you think about it. It's pretty cool. Now, the pros of online training. It is flexible. You don't have to travel somewhere. At least with our online training, it's asynchronous. Some is not. There are a handful of other online programs, but they require you to be online at a certain time. Ours are asynchronous. There is the speed of learning. That is a definite pro of online training. You can watch the videos again and again, and you can get to where you need to be really fast. And then there's the total cost of training. It's quite often less expensive for you, as you don't have to travel. You don't have to be away from your family. You don't have to take time off work. You can do it at night. The total cost, the opportunity cost, as we like to call it, is much lower. Now, the cons are, once again, it requires discipline. You got to log into the program. You've got to go through the courses. You've got to ask questions if you have questions. And it is not free. You do have to spend money. And that's something, folks, I'll tell you, for the longest time, I did not want to invest in courses and conferences and did not spend money on myself. And then as soon as I started to, that is when my career exploded. And now every year I'm spending probably around $10,000 on just personal development in books, courses, conferences, etc. Highly recommend that. The third way is rapid fire skill-based boot camps, and these don't yet exist. This week is something we are heavily invested in developing. This is something we are looking at getting off the ground by the beginning of next calendar year. And this would be a week to 2 week, most likely a week long process where it is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. hands-on, going and learning specific tasks. This is going to be very different than a manufacturer training course where you're following a workbook and you're learning a lot about, or a little about a lot. We're going to narrow in on 3 or 4 key tasks, and then we will teach those tasks. And we will teach them multiple different ways, because as I've seen running a 22-man tech group on 120 plus projects each year for $60 million of revenue, there are only a handful of tasks that you do as a BAS professional to get stuff done. And so these rapid fire skill-based boot camps, they are going to be the holy grail, in my opinion. Now, while they are immersive and they are rapid and they are hands-on, that is all great, but there are some definite cons. The opportunity cost, these are going to be expensive. I don't see any way around these being expensive. I mean, these are, if you think about it, right? One, you've got the cost of the instructor, or in my case, it'll most likely be me for our business. And that ain't cheap, because that's time that the instructor can never get back. It's also time you can never get back because you are physically stepping away from your business. So you've got that. You've got travel costs, per diem, etc. It's also going to require a certain type of personality, because the thing with boot camps, having personally gone through boot camps, they don't slow down. These aren't a course where you're going at the speed of the slowest person in the class. You're going fast, and if someone doesn't understand it, well, they're pretty much up a creek without a paddle, because that's just how it's going to be. And finally, you have got to be ready to come there and be humble. Meaning that if you think you know it all and you're unwilling to learn and unwilling to develop yourself, then you are not going to ask questions. You are not going to admit when you don't know something, and you're not going to take anything out of it. But that's just for all training, right? Okay. So that was a lot to take in. And this was a little different than most of our episodes. Most of our episodes are very direct. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. This episode wanted to address something that I don't know. Maybe I'm contrarian. Maybe it's because we run a BAS training business that's online. Maybe we're completely biased and I'm completely wet on this, and this is just the world according to Phil. But I have a firm belief that seeing that other businesses, I mean, I've been reading about code camps where they have a 95% satisfaction rate for the folks who get hired from there. And that's independent research. That's not sponsored by the code camps. I mean, if other industries are able to use online and rapid, short-term, intensive, immersive training to see massive results, why can't we? You know, it's almost a running joke. If you've been in this industry for a while, the BAS industry doesn't change. It changes so slowly. And I think that's to our own detriment in this situation. We're still holding on to 1980s, 1970s, 1960s learning styles. And these learning styles, they just don't work fast enough. And my hope is that by listening to this, those of you who are trying to grow, those of you who are trying to develop, are going to feel motivated to step forward and invest in yourself. Maybe that looks like self-study. Feel free to email me at phil.zito@buildingautomationmonthly.com. If you've got questions about how to go about that, I'd love to, give you some perspective on that. If you go to our store page and you go to any of our courses, you'll see our course workbooks. Feel free to download those. And if you feel like you can teach yourself with our course workbooks, more power to you. Great. Have at it. But some of you, which, at this point, there's a lot of you, but some of you are going to come and want to invest in our courses. And that's awesome. We have dedicated standalone courses that have lifetime access, that are fully online, that'll teach you exactly what you need to do for specific tasks. And we also have a corporate program for those of you who work for an organization where we assess you, and then we have a 2 or a 4 course package where you can then go and be assigned your own personal learning map, and then we will go and assess you at the end. And we've seen tremendous results from this with the organizations we've worked with. Now, the final note I want to leave you on is in the next episode, we're going to get very tactical. We are going to develop a self-development plan. What we're going to do is I'm going to go and scour the internet for some job descriptions for entry-level technicians. And I'm going to see if we can pull out some commonalities around tasks that need to be done. Then we're going to see if we can build a self-development plan along with a list of materials and things like that for those of you who have the fire within inside to go self-execute. And once again, for those of you who need a little bit of help, you want some guidance, you want to get there even faster, we do offer online training programs that will do just that. They'll teach you everything from programming, design, install, etc. But for the rest of you, you're really going to want to check out this episode. So thanks a ton for those of you who also listen all the time. Awesome. I can't believe we're at episode 130. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who are new, also, thank you so much for being here. I know that this was a controversial topic, and some of you may be a little offended by some of the things I said. Realize that I bring this information to you in the spirit of growth and development and sharing. Like I said, in-person programs, they are not bad. They just don't get there as fast as other programs could. And my hope is that we as an industry will take a look at how we are currently developing folks and will give an honest thought to, is what we're doing right now really working? My ideal vision is that 5 years from now, there's 3 or 4 companies like our company that are out there providing online training. So folks around the world have the opportunity to go and enter this great field of building automation. Hopefully that will happen. That would be awesome. And who knows? For those of you who want to have the show notes, who want to get access to those course workbooks that I described, as well as to be able to access any of the information and links from this episode, please go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/130. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/130. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. I can't wait to talk to you in next week's episode where we actually build out a development plan for you. Thanks a ton. Take care.